Section 8.1, we're going to talk about factoring trinomials. I am very, very confident that everybody in this room has done factoring before. At least involving numbers. Maybe not functions. We'll talk about functions here in a minute. What does factoring mean? Like if I asked you, factor the number 24. What would you tell me? There are lots of correct answers.
Which numbers make 24?
And what do you mean by make 24?
Times zero.
You break it up so there's like a tree so the numbers multiply. So one correct answer, I heard one correct answer would be 24 can be written as 8 times 3. That's a correct answer. What's another correct answer? 6 times 4. 12 times 2. 24 times 1. I told you there were a lot of correct answers. We're still not done. There's still more correct answers. Maybe another correct answer for me? Negative 8 times negative 3. Okay, that is a correct answer. I will concede. However, typically when we say factor a number, we mean only use positive integers. So negative 8 times negative 3 is equal to 24. That's usually not considered correct. By the same token, I could go 48 times a half. We don't usually use fractions either. What I was thinking was, how about 2 times 4 times 3? Is that 24? Yeah? The most important answer is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. Why is that the most important answer? Because they are all prime numbers. What do you mean by prime numbers?
They can't be divided by anything other than 1 or 2.
Correct. 2, the only way to factor the number 2 is 2 times 1. And the only way to factor 3 is 3 times 1. So this is called the prime factorization. That's the most important one. And when we deal with polynomials, this is what we're going to want. When we factor, we mean factor as much as we can so that nothing will factor more. All right, well, here's something students are usually really, really good at. What if I asked you to take x plus 2 and multiply it by x minus 5? What would you tell me to do? Use FOIL. What's FOIL? It's an acronym. It's a shortcut for helping you to remember how to multiply. It stands for first, outside, inside, last. So how does that work?
You multiply the first 2.
You multiply the first 2. So you take x times x.
That's x squared.
And that's x squared. And then you multiply outside. What do you mean by outside?
X and negative 5.
The outside ones are x and negative 5. You multiply those, you get negative 5x. And then the inside, that's I, that's 2x. And then finally the last is 2 times negative 5, which is negative 10. So that's x squared minus 3x minus 10. In the big scheme of things, being able to do FOIL, being able to multiply polynomials, really isn't very important. So why do we teach it?
You know why the roots are there.
Right, and then what you're really talking about is factoring. So the important skill is to be able to go the other way. If I were to give you x squared minus 3x minus 10, how would you factor it? And to factor means to write it as 2 things, or more, in this case 2 things multiplied together. So what you need to recognize is, how do I end up with a trinomial? How do I end up with 3 pieces? Well, it must have come from 2 binomials. So that tells you that if I start with a trinomial, x squared minus 3x minus 10, and I ask you to factor it, it has to start this way as 2 trinomials, or I'm sorry, 2 binomials. Well, we know the answer. The answer is x plus 2 times x minus 5. So foiling really isn't important in itself. We teach FOIL so that we can teach you to go backward and do what's called factor. Students, like I say, are generally very, very good at FOIL. Students are usually pretty good at factoring trinomials when this first number is the number 1. On Friday, we'll talk about how do you factor when this first number is not the number 1. That's harder to do. But let's do some more examples. How would you factor? Oh, I don't know. How about if I gave you x squared plus 2x minus 8? And I asked you to factor that. What would you do? Well, what you should do is draw two sets of parentheses like so. And then what? Okay, so that's exactly right, but you jumped one step too far. What goes in the front spots? X and X. How come? That's how you get the x squared, right? So that's the easy part, x and x. And then you're exactly right. You said exactly the right thing. I need to find two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 8. That's the last part of FOIL. At the same time, I need those two numbers to add to be the number positive 2. So what two numbers can you think of that will multiply together to be a negative 8 and yet add up to be a positive 2? Positive 4 and negative 2, I think, is absolutely correct. The beautiful thing about factoring is it's really easy to check your answer. How do you check your answer? Do FOIL. And I would hope, truthfully, at this point, you can pretty much do FOIL in your head. I would hope you would look at this and say, well, x times x is x squared. And then I'm going to have a negative 2x and a positive 4x. A negative 2x and a positive 4x makes the positive 2x. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So I would hope you would, if you need to write down that FOIL to check, write it down. Truthfully, I would hope you'd pretty much be able to do it in your head. All right, how about, I don't know, x squared plus, I don't know, anybody have a number they like? 7x y. I'm going to throw another letter in there just for fun. And then I need plus 10y squared. Okay, so what does throwing that extra letter in there? This one doesn't have just an x, it's got x and y, and then it's got a y squared. How does that change life? I'm going to have what? I'm going to have two factors, yep. And what's going to happen in these two factors? It's going to include x and y. So how am I going to get the x squared up front? I have to have an x and an x. How am I going to get the y squared on the other end? I've got to have a y and a y on the other end. That's all. So having the two letters in there really doesn't change a whole lot. I've got to have an x and an x, and then I've got to have a y and a y. And then I deal with the numbers. I need two numbers that multiply to give me a 10 and add to give me a 7. 5 and 2. So plus 5 plus 2. And again, you can do a quick FOIL. You've got x squared. Outside, you've got a 2xy. Inside, a 5xy. That does give you the 7. On the end, 5 and 2 gives the 10. Y squared. Questions on that one? All right, one more. How about one more of these, and we got one other thing to talk about quickly. X squared plus, somebody give me a nice number. 36. X minus, somebody give me another nice number. 4. Factor x squared plus 36x minus 4 for me. I'll give you a hint, it's a trick question. You can't. Why not? None of the factors of 4 add up to be 36, do they? I mean, if you were going to do this, it'd have to look like this. You've got your parentheses. You got to have your x and your x. How can you get 4? How can you get negative 4 on the end? Well, there's not very many ways. It's either 2 and 2 or 4 and 1. From a 2 and a 2, can you get a 36? No. From a 4 and a 1, can you get a 36? No. So it doesn't factor. So what do you write? What do you call something that doesn't factor? What did you call these numbers that didn't factor? Prime. So what do you call a polynomial that doesn't factor? Prime. So your answer here would be x squared plus 36x minus 4 is prime. It does not factor. And that's sometimes a correct answer. When you go to take a test and you have a whole bunch of factoring problems, how many times do you think is prime is going to be the right answer?
Maybe once.
Maybe once. I've had students take a test and write is prime for every problem. That wasn't a very good idea. You really think the teacher's going to put a whole bunch of problems where the answer is you can't do any work? Probably not. I don't think that's very realistic.
Telling us is a trick, and now you're
Right now I'm playing psychological war games with you. Now they will all be prime, and you'll be trying for hours to try to factor. No, I won't do that to you. Okay, the last thing we have is a special kind of factoring called difference of squares. And this, again, I'm guessing this is probably something you've seen. What happens if I take a plus b and I do FOIL and multiply it with a minus b? What happens if these two things are exactly the same except one has a plus and one has a minus? Well, let's just try it. What's a times a? A squared. What about the outside? Minus ab. And the inside? Plus ab. And the last? Minus b squared. So a nice thing happens. The middle two ones cancel each other out. You get a squared minus b squared. This is called difference of squares because over here I have a square minus a square. Difference is a word for subtraction. So this is called difference of squares. So what you're going to look for here is something like this. If I give you x squared minus 36, you're going to notice that x is squared, and then 36 is a special number. What's 36? 6 squared. So how does x squared minus 6 squared factor? X plus 6 and x minus 6. How about if I gave you 4x squared minus 25? Two x plus 5. Excellent. 2x minus 5. 4 happens to be a square also, doesn't it? 4 is 2 squared. What if I gave you 81x squared minus 100y squared? Again, does having 2 letters in there throw you off? Shouldn't. What do you get for an answer? 9x minus 10y? 9x plus 10y. Okay, you did it in the opposite order than I did it. I usually put the plus first and the minus second. Does it matter if you put the minus first and the plus second? No, doesn't matter which order you put it in. Go the right answer. All right, and my last question. What if I gave you x squared plus 4? What's that? It's not a difference of squares. Why not? It's got a plus in the middle, not a minus. How does it factor?
X plus 2 squared.
All right, that's a very common mistake. A lot of people want to say that this is x plus 2 squared, but x plus 2 squared means to take x plus 2 and multiply it by x plus 2. And when you do FOIL, you get x squared plus 4x plus 4, because you get a 2x on the outside and a 2x on the inside. So that's not the right answer. Very common mistake, though. I'll give you a hint. It's another trick question. Now, undefined, what do you call something that doesn't factor? You call it prime. All right, so difference of squares, when I have a minus in the middle, it factors. If I have a plus in the middle, it does not. It is prime.